So just a little bit about Singularity University, and I'm not going to go through too much. We'll talk about this in the period afterwards. I want to get to our program, but just briefly, the mission is to educate, inspire, and empower leaders to apply exponential technologies to address humanity's grand challenges. That's what has me be here. So the impact in SU broadly is looking to impact positively 1 billion people in the next decade using all these exponential technologies, some of which are on display in the Innovation Lab. We're going to hear from some of the innovators as well. Obviously, this is a famous quote now, we've seen it many times, but the best way to predict the future is to create it yourself. So that's part of what we're here together to do. And the community, this is thinking about the global community. I'm just going to share a little bit about the values that the organization has taken time to develop. And obviously impact, optimism, respect, connection, stewardship, generosity, and boldness. These are all things that in today's world couldn't be more appropriate and needed to sort of counter what we're living into. We're going to have to be innovative. We're going to have to use all of those values to get to the next place. San Diego's leadership team, folks, I'm just going to ask everybody to stand, and I'll introduce actually brother and sister duo, Ben and Shay Badii, to say a few words.
Thank you everyone for being here. We sure appreciate it. This chapter began this time last year. Now we have 200 members. The first time I attended Singularity University, I had the pleasure of listening to their first speaker, Mr. Hariri, sitting over there. And I thought, oh my God, I gotta get this thing going in San Diego because there's too much beautiful information that others need to know about. And since then we have grown. We have the pleasure of having Rodrigo, Don, Heather, and Jane joining us as well. We intend to share what we learn to members of the society and hope that they can collaborate and make this a town that can contribute to the innovation of exponential technology. Thank you for coming. We sure appreciate it.
Thank you all for coming. We have a very nice evening. A nice group of presenters here tonight, and I don't want to take too much time. Just in a nutshell, we're here because we have a very positive and hopeful overview of the future, and we're here to serve, and we're here to empower those of you who are out there, innovators and in the field, to make it so that you can connect and do what you do best, and we're here to serve you. So any way that we can help you, please come on by, let us know so we can make the world a better place, an abundant place for everyone. Thank you.
Just a few things to note, ways that you can get involved and see us. I mean, I think the point here is we're, as Shay indicated, we're working to support this local chapter developing, and part of being here, and if you feel inspired, we invite you to formally join us as a member. Part of what that affords you is access to other team members, business partners, and opportunities. We also have introductions that we'll make on your behalf to other SU community members. There's an eligibility for you to share your massive transformative purpose, MTPs for short, with this audience, with others, at some of these small format events, which this is, and also our larger format events. And being featured in our newsletter, priority with some of our VIP and limited space events, which this is, and some brand affiliation, just to give you some reasons to think about actually joining us. And Shay is going to share a little bit more about ways you can get involved.
So if you'd like to join our chapter, you can either do it on the website, or if you have your smartphones, you can whip it out and download the SU app. Just enter the information, and once you get to the page where you're in, request to join our chapter. And once you join our chapter, we'll give you access to a password protected list of our members and information about them. So some of the other ways that you can engage with us is we have programs on a monthly basis. Some of them are larger events, some of them are smaller events and salons. We also have workshops, and we also have our sister mastermind group, the A360, that Nikki runs, that they meet once every other month. Those are great ways for connecting with other people who are in this space. You can also volunteer. We appreciate all of our volunteers who help us spread the word and do what we do. And you can also help design the content and the programs that we work on, or even host an event. And if you'd like to sponsor, even better, you can see Elizabeth or David once he gets here. Thank you.
For discovery, the opportunities and platforms for discovery are changing. So to unpack the first one, you probably all have in your mind that slide, you have DNA, behavior, and environment. And those are the magic contributors to health and illness. And I think we're drilling down now that DNA is about 30% of our health contribution. But it's so much more than DNA. I'm a genomics junkie, but it's so much more than DNA, right? It's our other omics, it's our microbiome, and as we look at different ethnicities, our genetic variants are so different. And then as we think about behavior and environment, we're seeing those very much intersect in the way of social and structural determinants of health. So thinking about access to high quality food, or even the ability to exercise depending on environments that people live in. And so it's much more complex than we originally thought, but I think we've got our arms around really what we need to study. And that brings me to the next, which is the constructs for study are also changing. These used to happen just in institutions, a lot of institutional data hoarding, so to speak. I think it's time now, and obviously started a business around it, that we have to bring people to the table. So people are generating more digital data than ever before, and with 5G and IoT, the ability to collect data from the real world, the data from zip codes, from real life living is finally upon us. Certainly DNA data generation is getting much more accessible, and that's super exciting. And then the ability and the structures to aggregate this data in a meaningful way to do studies are becoming more accessible as well. And what we're very excited about is people's legal access to data is now there. You have a legal right to your health data. You can ask for your data streams. We're not totally there yet, but people have a heck of a lot more access to their data than they ever have. So where we want to get to, of course, precision health, personalized medicine, I want to see us get to a future of autonomy, that we can take care of our health in a more predictive, more personalized way that keeps us kind of out of the healthcare system. So that's kind of the convergence that we're leveraging at Luna. There's already been an introduction, but what happens in Luna is people permission their health data via DNA, via electronic health record streams, surveys, investigator-initiated surveys, etc. And they permission one copy, and that copy stays in the system where questions come to the data and only answers lead. This allows people to have true control of their profile and of their data. And we think that's super important. We've operationalized transparency, trust, reciprocity, and privacy. And we're really excited to start welcoming a lot of discovery into the platform. So we work with a number of disease foundations who are using our data aggregation organization and structure and research readiness to really advance discovery. We have a population health program coming online tomorrow. Hopefully we'll get that out. And we're just really excited to really bring people to the table of discovery. So that's what's important to me, and that's how we're operationalizing this feature of people-centered discovery. So thanks for being here today.
Thank you very much, Carol. Appreciate it. And the format is we're just asking everybody to say a few words, and then we'll get into dialogue here. But let me also now introduce you to our next speaker, Leigh Flannery. Heather is the global lead of ConsenSys Health. She's also co-founder and board chair of Blockchain and Healthcare Global, BIGH, or HG, big, I assume, maybe. Yes?
It's important that you
Yes,
phonetically pronounce
Please.
your acronym, so
Please.
you can refer to it as the big thing,
The
or
big, okay, thank you.
did you go to the big meeting, that kind
Okay,
of, that's
okay.
the vibe
Thank
for
you.
it.
I appreciate that. Gotten a little education. Okay, so it's a new 501c6 trade association organized under the IEEE ISTO. She chairs the IEEE SA, here we go, P 2418.6 Standards Development Working Group, aka Blockchain in Healthcare and Life Sciences.
It's a scorcher.
She also serves as the 2019 co-chair of the Global HIMSS Blockchain and Healthcare Task Force, chairs the Healthcare Special Interest Groups at the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, EEA, for another set of acronyms, and is an associate editor of the peer-reviewed journal Frontiers Blockchain and Science. Ms. Flannery is also an Innovation Fellow at EP3 Foundation, has served as industry faculty for the United States Department of Health and Human Services, I was going to say HHS office, of the National Coordinator of Health IT, US HHSONC, and is an active consultant advisor and keynote speaker. And there you go.
All right. So I'm right-handed, so I have to have the microphone in the correct place. It is such an honor to be here with all of you and with my esteemed co-panelists this evening. I have found this event and the culture at Singularity University to be incredibly energizing and totally aligned with my personal mission and passion. So I'm hoping we have a great dialogue this evening. I lead an organization called ConsenSys Health, which is the healthcare and life sciences arm of a larger company called ConsenSys, spelled with a Y. ConsenSys is the largest pure-play blockchain company in the world, founded by one of the co-founders of Ethereum, which is one very significant blockchain infrastructure in the world. And at ConsenSys, we really are generally highly focused on seeing positive transformation of socioeconomic structures, financial structures. In healthcare specifically, we are incredibly moved at the opportunity we see to change access and equity related to health services and outcomes, absolutely to drive the process leading ultimately to precision medicine. We also believe that health data is among the most valuable data, not only valuable, but the most personal, the most intimately connected data, and new models for data governance and monetization paired with what we think of as an upgrade to our entire bioethical posture as an industry are values near and dear to our hearts. The work that I do in standards development is absolutely critical. The absence of, or the early stage of technical standards is one of a range of barriers to adoption of this exponential technology that we face. It is only one though, and many of the barriers are not in the category of technology at all. One of the things that is the most inspiring to me about blockchain technology particularly is it's more than a technology. It's an unprecedented opportunity.
Bluetooth disconnected.
No more Bluetooth, we've got that cleared up. It is the only opportunity in human history where we can look at a set of stakeholders with distorted incentives, and we can conceptualize an experiment, design a system, theorize about what incentives might create the behaviors that we're looking for among all the stakeholder groups, run an experiment, and then iteratively refine and be able to arrive at discoveries where in highly complex adaptive systems, we have the opportunity to change systemically as all of these converging innovations are hitting us. I am incredibly excited to be alive at this moment in history, and I know I probably share that with many of you in the room and many of you that are involved in this community. It's an extraordinary moment. I think of it like, imagine the Gutenberg printing press and maybe the steam engine and perhaps something as fundamental as the integrated circuit, all somehow by some miracle hitting roughly equivalent levels of viability, commercial accessibility, and impact, all at about the same time. So one thing that's very important to me in our work is that we are looking at the overlapping impact of multiple exponential technologies on the impact of human life, human longevity, human quality of life, equity, and access to resources that allow all of us to advance together as a civilization. So at ConsenSys Health, in the organization that I lead, we're working on some of the hairiest challenges that have confounded our industry for a long time. That includes how exactly do we transition from a health system that pays for volume instead of pays for value. There are layers of complexity under that we think we can create a 10x improvement over baseline. We also see the convergence of machine learning and blockchain as highly strategic. and particularly when aligned with very advanced privacy-preserving technologies that would love to tell you more. And our Chief Technology Officer at ConsenSys Health is here in the room, which is one of the world's foremost leaders on that subject. Very humble gentleman in the corner back there. Bill, if you raise your hand so they can swamp you later. But it's that combination of blockchain plus decentralized AI plus an entirely new privacy paradigm that we think is going to allow us to advance and remain free and sovereign and live in a more just society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heather.
Before we move to our next speaker, I would like to ask Dr. Hariri to join our panel, please.
Thank you very much. So while he's coming up, I'd like to now introduce you to our next speaker, Rodrigo Martinez. Rodrigo is the Chief Marketing and Design Officer at Veritas Genetics, a genome company. Rodrigo lives at the crossroads of biology, technology, and design. And for the last 20 years, he's led some of the most exciting projects in the health and life sciences revolution. Before joining Veritas, Rodrigo was Life Science Chief Strategist at IDEO, where he led and worked on 20-plus projects from creating innovative healthcare and health services and products to envisioning future tech for the year 2079. Before IDEO, Rodrigo was a principal with the Boston Consulting Group.
Thank you
Okay,
so
all
much.
right.
So what I wanted to do is I put together a couple of slides that I closed from my presentation yesterday, just to set, and I'll just take 3 or 4 minutes, just to share with you where some things are happening in consumer genomics and where are we seeing some opportunities going forward, and of course some challenges. So we are definitely at a critical inflection point. I picked here some dimensions of this critical inflection point. On one side, we see the ancestry fad is starting to, sort of plateau. Sales of 23andMe and ancestry, et cetera, are starting to sort of slow down. Regulation changes. FDA is starting to dictate some things we can say about drug-gene interactions, as an example, et cetera. Of course, privacy awareness is a key concern, and that has not and this, of course, is not only in our industry, but Facebook, et cetera, et cetera. Some emerging tools in the machine learning AI space. Some of it is BS, some of it is real. We need to pull that apart as well. And then I want to focus on these three very simply, on these 3 dimensions. One is technology shifting from genotyping to sequencing, and I'll go into that in a second. The value of understanding why a genome is helpful as a preventive tool, and then of course the decreasing sequencing costs, which is related to all of this. So just remember, we know genes affect our health in many different ways. And here's an illustration where there's some things that we have in variants in our genes that are small in terms of number of things we have, but that can be very critical. And you get really sick and you need to talk to your doctor about it next week because you actually might drop dead. This is your, oh my gosh, he was so healthy playing tennis every day and eating kale and broccoli, just dropped dead at the gym, that type of thing. Then we have the majority of the things that we have around gene and lifestyle interaction give us risks that are not necessarily something that will give you a disease or a condition immediately, but they're clinically important to know, and some things you can do about them. And then, of course, there's a no impact on health. And over the last few years, there have been 2 approaches. There's the direct-to-consumer direction, which was sort of ancestry, I have curly hair, I can smell asparagus and pea sort of world, to, we now want to start to get a little bit into clinical, medical, useful things. And then there was the diagnostic, like I'm sick, I'm going to the hospital, hey, we think there might be something in your genetics, we need to do sort of a diagnostic test. I'm simplifying to make that distinction. Now, here's an important distinction, which is the difference in technology so far that has been used for most of the genetic tests that you know, which is genotyping. So, genotyping typically will look at 0.5 to 1% of your DNA, depending on what chip we're using. Basically asks questions to what already you know the answer to. It's a yes or no, a yes or no, yes or no. And it ranges in sort of the $100, $200 range. And examples of this, of course, are 23andMe and Ancestry. Ancestry is just announced they're trying to move a little bit up to this side. And then on the sequencing side, which is very different, you have two main branches: exome, about 1.5 to 2% of your DNA, or whole genome. The exome is sort of in the 200, 500. Examples of this would be things like helix or color, etc. And then, of course, there's whole genome, and where you can learn things from the coding region, and of course, eventually things from the non-coding region as well. More expensive. This sort of gives you a lay of these two different technologies. So now, for the first time, now we know that having your genome sequenced touches on this side and touches on this side. And we've known this for a long time, although we are just starting to understand how much does it touch here, how much does it touch here, and then of course there's also here. A key determinant of this was cost, right? So a declining cost in sequencing starts to change which direction you might want to take. We understand more about the genome, even though we're just starting, and we clearly understand more and we value more. And we're also more aware of the limitations of the technology used in genotyping. So there's a question that is like, well, is it worth it? At what point do I decide to sequence my genome, and do I really learn something useful or not? And I just give you here 4 data points, because it's a personal answer, right? It depends. Well, if you tell me, well, it depends. How much do I need to pay for it? When you pay $1 million, it's very different than if I pay $500, right? So here's some data points to go through. One in 10 kids will have something that has a predictive element of a monogenic disease, of which 1/3 do not have medical history. So you're not going to pick it up. For those of you that have kids, you're not going to pick it up by, well, my grandfather had this, so, right? 3 to 5% of adults that are our customers will have a critical red result, meaning you need to talk to your doctor immediately about this, so it's 3 to 5%. And then, of course, more than 80% of people have known risks that are worth to know about, and responses to medications, etc. So then it's up to you to decide, is this worth it to you? And you will say, well, it depends. How much? And all these other conditions. And we'll talk briefly about that. Then the question is, yeah, but what does my doctor say? And what we see is that we're early on, we're early on, but we see this trend of large institutions starting to adopt whole genome sequencing as a preventive tool. So we have a collaboration with Mayo Clinic, where they offer our test to their executive health program. Different hospitals, including the Brigham and Women in Boston and many others, are starting to integrate into their clinical practice this now possibility of doing this whole genome sequencing. Does this mean that all doctors now believe that we need to be doing this as standard of care? Of course not. And there's still a lot to be able to educate and explain why and how do you use it, etc. So finally, what I wanted to do is I just want to share a couple of slides that sort of indicate where we are. For the longest time, we've been looking at this slide of the cost of sequencing that some of you might have seen, of how much does it cost to sequence a human genome. And the challenge with that slide is that it's very hard. Do you remember the slide that shows Moore's Law? You cannot try to fathom Instagram, Facebook, trolls, Russian hackers by looking at the Moore's Law graph. And we've been looking at that graph of the cost of sequencing, and in the same way, it doesn't give you a sense of what are the programs, what are the possibilities, what are the products, what are the things that are services are coming. So the graph that we think needs to come with us is consumer adoption. If we see that consumers are actually paying out of the wallet to have the genome sequenced, and we think there's value in that, and we see what the trend starts to look like, that will give us an idea of what's coming next. Some of them, the DNA marketplace, such as Luna, right? And others. And I'm going quickly just to finish. We part of this graph was, we see up here, we always thought that there would be this inflection point around $1,000, the genome $1,000. We offered it in 2016 for the first time to consumers and physicians. As the cost went down, this was actually the price, not just the cost, but the price to consumers. And we weren't really there at an inflection point. Adoption was not what we thought it would be. No. For a series of reasons that I'm happy to get into. But something interesting happened. In July, we dropped the price down to $5.99. And I'm talking about a whole genome, clinical grade, with all the acronyms that you can imagine, CLIA, CAP, blah, blah, blah. And this doubled sales immediately without any additional dollar in marketing. So there's something very interesting happening at one point where people say, oh, you know what? I'm actually interested. I actually want to do this. So I'm going to finish here with this. This is sort of where we see things going in this emergent social genome era, where a series of products and services are starting to come out that are based on our DNA, our bio, obviously, some of the things that my colleague panelists have discussed. And then, of course, it comes with a series of questions and risks and all the things that we need to be discussing. So I'm gonna finish there. I think over the next decade, pretty much every newborn in major hospitals will be sequenced. I'll give you an example. We have conversations right now going with 3 top hospitals in the U.S. where their interest is to get in the next 5 years to sequence every newborn. Right? Prevent. Interpretation, understanding the differences in your genome is really what matters, not necessarily as much as sequence. New products coming, and of course, the series of challenges inside. And I would just say that here's some challenges that I'll throw out for the discussion if they're of interest to you. How do we explain and engage in understanding what is risk and what is value? It's still hard to convince and talk about this and have a common understanding. Who pays for it? Should insurance pay for it? No. So I'm going to stop there. I got my stop sign. I will tell you one thing. We offered to the Exponential Medicine answer team to offer 20 genomes at a discounted price of $3.99. So there's 20 of them available. Whoever's interested, just take that code. You can do it, and you can order your genome for $3.99 if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rodrigo. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce our next panelist and speaker, Robert Hariri. So Bob is an accomplished surgeon, biomedical scientist, and serial entrepreneur in 2 technology sectors, biomedicine and aerospace. He is chairman, founder, and chief executive officer of Celularity, one of the world's leading human cellular therapeutics companies. He was the founder and CEO of Anthrogenesis, and after an acquisition by Celgene, served as CEO of Celgene Cellular Therapeutics. He also founded the genome-based health intelligence company, Human Longevity. He also pioneered the use of stem cells to treat a range of life-threatening human diseases and continues today to make transformative contributions in the fields of immuno-oncology and cell therapeutics, along with tissue engineering and functional regeneration. He is widely...
This event and Singularity University have a great deal of personal importance to me because in many ways I kind of earned my stripes speaking here with Dan Kraft and Peter Diamandis over the years. And the best part about Singularity University and the events that they sponsor is the community that has been built around it. And I look in the audience and I have many of my friends, my former colleague Fernando Gandara is here, who we've worked together at Human Longevity. And it's really, really nice to share with you a couple of just observations based upon some of the great presentations you've seen so far. You know, we're all here because we believe that we can make a difference. We can make a contribution to change the way human health is managed in the future, and that we can do something to improve the quality and potentially the quantity of years that we all can spend on this planet and contribute to society. I've been fortunate enough to be involved in everything from the day-to-day practice of clinical medicine, where I took care of probably the worst patients you could imagine, head and spinal cord injury patients, and then got really interested in what the molecular sciences could potentially do to allow us to understand and predict the natural history of an individual's health and potentially intervene. And most recently, and I presented here over the last several years, I've been very much involved in trying to develop tools to address some of the diseases that plague us, everything from cancer to autoimmune disease, and potentially even the degenerative diseases that are associated with aging. What I think I'll simply share with you is that a lot of progress has been made in one aspect of this, which is to develop tools that can be used to, first and foremost, in a biologically very valid way, control and potentially reverse or arrest the progress of autoimmune disease, using the natural immunomodulatory behavior of stem cells. And then more recently, you all know what CAR T therapy is. The fact that we can engineer immune cells to go after our cancers is now a reality, but in its current configuration, its current form, it is neither practical, economical, or deployable in any large scale. So part of the challenge in following the mantra of Peter Diamandis, part of our mission here is to democratize these types of therapies. One of the approaches is to find a cell type that can be mass-produced at a high quality and high scale that can be delivered with economics that don't break the healthcare bank. And that's really what my company, Celularity, has been doing. First, as part of human longevity, where Fernanda and I and our team work to turn this platform into a rapidly deployable, economical way to address these diseases. And more recently, in our approach, taking the immune cells from the placenta and using them to combat cancer. So I want to leave you with a couple of interesting observations. First of all, I'm assuming that a lot of folks in the audience have had children. How many in the audience have actually seen a placenta up close in person? I know you have. All right. So the placenta is one of the most remarkable organs that nature provides us. It is what we now recognize. It's the life support organ that keeps a developing fetus alive for 9 months, even though the physiology of the mother may vary dramatically. And it does so by creating an immunologic relationship between the mother and the fetus that is unique. Okay? Mother carries that fetus for 9 months, even though she's only 50% the source of the DNA, which means she's only partially matched. She doesn't reject it, it doesn't reject her. Right? What about surrogate pregnancy? Mom's not even related to the fetus. She carries it for 9 months, doesn't reject it, it doesn't reject her. That natural immunological tolerance is resident in every cell in the placenta, and it's the reason why the placenta can be a source of cells that can be one size fits all. That's a big deal. Okay. The other important thing is 1 in 1,000 pregnant women has cancer. How many pregnant women convert their cancer or transmit their cancer to the developing fetus? Doesn't happen. So the placenta is a natural defense system against the transmission of cancer. Those two fundamental properties of the placenta are at the heart of the technology we're developing at this company, Celularity, to treat everything from hematologic malignancies to solid tumors. And we already know that we can use them to treat immunologic diseases and ultimately the degenerative diseases of aging. So my time is up. I see the stop sign back there. Thank you very much. Looking forward to hopefully interacting with many of you in the future. Thank you.
And we will have opportunity for Q&A. I'm not sure if we have another slide here for our addition, but we'll just wing it. So I'd like to introduce also Jane Metcalfe. Jane is an entrepreneur, publisher, speaker, moderator, board member, advisor, manager, investor, been in and around a number of projects. She's built, raised funds, invested in organizations in diverse industries, including media. Some of those examples include she's the founder, CEO, editor-in-chief of NEO.LIFE, previously co-founder, president, board member of Wired Magazine, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to ask her to say a few words. Sorry, this is off of LinkedIn, so there's the ad-lib. Thanks, Shay.
Yeah, great, thank you. Coming next to Dr. Hariri, that's a really modest way of saying, yeah, so first of all, I'm thrilled to be here because I don't think my mic is on. There it is, or maybe I just need to put it much, much closer. I have to say, Exponential Medicine changed my life. And the reason is I have no MD, I don't have a PhD in biochemistry, and when Daniel Kraft kept saying, oh, you really ought to come to this conference, I just felt like I wasn't the target audience for that. So before I go any further, I'm just curious, how many of you are in the life sciences? Okay, so you may relate to the fact that you're not an MD, PhD. So when I showed up here and they gave us scrubs, you know, literally like Dr. Scrubs, it's like my imposter syndrome went through the roof. Okay. Triggered. But I'll tell you what happened. I actually, I came here looking for answers to my father's Alzheimer's and my mother's bipolar schizoaffective disorder. And I thought, if I go to Singularity, I will get to the leading edge really quickly, and I will find a better way forward than what the doctors had mapped out for my family. And in fact, I did. But more than that, what I discovered are incredibly brilliant people who have for 15 years gone very, very deep into their specialty, but who sadly, as a result of that, have a harder time keeping up with all the other fields that are exploding right now. And I realized that these people like you and Dawn and Rodrigo are holding the tools of tremendous transformation for our society and for our families, for our children, and ultimately for our species. You know, CRISPR was invented along the same time, and last year the first edited human embryos were born. And suddenly, what seemed like science fiction became science fact. And we as a society are not prepared to have the conversations about how to regulate this. And the scientists involved are not prepared to make those decisions on our behalf. So you may be confronted with some of these opportunities or challenges. If you're having children, if you have aging parents, if you yourself are diagnosed with something. And what I'm interested in are the tools that are being developed, the people who are developing them, and the choices that are being made. Because make no mistake about it, the choices we make in the next few years will set us on a path. So I'm going to make sure they're good choices. So my mission is to tell the stories of the people and the companies and the ideas of what I'm calling the neo-biological revolution, right? 25 years ago, it's actually 26 now, but that makes me feel so much older. 26 years ago, we founded Wired magazine, and we coined the phrase digital revolution. Coming here to Exponential Medicine, meeting all of these people, I thought, we are on the verge of another revolution. What can we do differently this time? The move fast and break things, didn't work so well, did it? At first everybody got really rich and everybody got connected to the internet, and it transformed our education, it transformed our creative expression, it transformed our communication skills, it built all these new communities that were no longer relegated to just geographic realities. It was transformational, it was liberating, it was democratizing, it was extraordinary. And then suddenly, everybody was so busy being excited about that and making tons of money that we stopped paying attention to the fact that it was eating away at our social structures. And it was eating away at our family, it was eating away at our self-esteem, it was creating all of these monopolies that are now bigger, they're like the banks, right? They're too big to fail on a certain level. So what can we do differently this time? What should we do differently this time? And what are you going to do about it? So I created NEO.LIFE in spite of myself, in spite of being way smarter than you would imagine somebody who would launch a media company in the 21st century would be. I'm way smarter than that, but clearly I have something I need to get out. And so anyway, NEO.LIFE is a newsletter, you can subscribe to it, you can learn about the future of neuroscience and genetics and longevity and synthetic biology and the future of food and sex and death and all of that. We started asking the leading edge scientists and artists and biohackers and writers what their visions for the future of Homo sapiens are. What are the product roadmaps and creative briefs? What are the heuristics we're going to carry forward? So that's a book that's coming out in January. You can sign up for the book. And then ultimately, we want to bring these conversations into various different communities. I go to pharmaceutical industry events, I go to crossover events like this, I go to cultural events, and I'm just interested in making sure that we, as the leading edge of Homo sapiens, the elites of Homo sapiens, are up to speed and prepared to make the kinds of choices and decisions that we need to guide our species into the next part of the 21st century. So, thank you for...
Thank you very much, Jane. Really appreciate it. Very much appreciate you being with us, and we're going to kick off a couple of questions, and we'd like to also invite you to think of questions that you might want to ask each other, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. I know, just throw a little extra, energy into the mix. That's what we're all about here. But my first question to all of you, and just ask you to say a few words. When you think about what you're most excited about for the future, and what do we need to deal with or solve, concretely, not just ethereal. What are the one or two things that must be resolved for us to achieve that better, brighter future. And so whoever wants to start first, who's ready, and the others can take your time to think about that question, that two-part question. That's how we'll kick it off. Who wants to start? Dawn?
Obviously, I'm most excited about bringing people to the table of discovery. I think they're the most important part of the discovery equation. I think they've been left out of discovery for a very long time. I think they hold all the keys to the types of data that we can transform into information. And I think the second part was, what do you worry about or what's in the way?
Yeah, what are the things that need to really be solved?
What needs to really be solved, I think is the concern around privacy and discrimination. And I worry that people won't lean into the products that are coming or the opportunities for engagement for fear of discrimination or any other type of negative impact for themselves, or when you're talking about DNA for their family. It's a great time for people to get into discovery, but we need to be careful about privacy, security, discrimination, and other list of nasties.
Thank you very much.
So I'll go ahead and follow on that, and you totally stole my thunder with the data governance message. But I don't think it will hurt to repeat the criticality. We have in the revolution that we've just lived through, we have seen massive exponential increases in data that are only accelerating. Right now, almost none of that data could be thought of as self-sovereign. And the legal constructs of that data generally does not treat it as property under the law. It doesn't treat it as labor under the law. The legal ambiguities and the pan-jurisdictional challenges there are enormous. And I agree that we will and perhaps should be held back until we can ensure that we are not creating a future where the life we're living is dominated by corporate or governmental hegemony. So sovereignty and freedom is, I think, a return of older revolutions whose time has come again.
You know, I'm trying to control myself because it's very hard to sit in an audience in California and not want to bring up a political debate about science and freedom and so on and so forth. You want me to go forward? All right. So, you know, there's something to be said about the importance of scientific liberty and the ability for industry and industry players to operate where they advance technology with regulatory freedoms and permissiveness that allows us to treat people, particularly people who have very few alternative modes of therapy, and give them access to treatments that, you know, may in fact be in the development stage or pre-approval and so on and so forth. Can anybody in this audience tell me which president actually advocated that anybody with a terminal illness that couldn't get treated with a current therapy actually got treated with an experimental therapy?
Trump.
Yeah, Donald Trump. So the bottom line is that you may all think that in California we live in an environment where science is driving political agendas. It certainly is not. And it's distressing to me as a surgeon who for 35 years introduced things that I thought was the best for my patient, even though in many cases I subjected myself to liabilities because those things were not approved, and there was some trial lawyer out there who would utilize those systems against practitioners if the outcome wasn't good. Okay? So let me ask you a question. The FDA is out there, and I love the FDA. They do an amazing job. Many of you have had prescription medicines and you've used them. Have any of you ever read a package insert that came with your antibiotic?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
You know how long they are? Well, that's remarkable. The average package insert for an antibiotic is the equivalent of 70 pages. Okay? That's the equivalent. Package inserts are not written for patients nor providers. They're written for trial attorneys. Okay? Nobody reads them. Anybody who says they read them here, I bet you haven't read the whole thing. Okay? The truth of the matter is that the regulatory system in this country is dysfunctional. It should permit people with 40, 50 years of practitioner experience to make decisions upon what they think is best for their patients. And even in the selection of genomic testing, okay, I think the best people to choose that are the people who actually pioneered the technology and turned it into the hands of clinicians. And ultimately, if we want to see progress in stem cell therapy and in immunotherapy, and we want it to actually be disseminated to our friends and relatives who really need those treatments, you got to get certain government administrations out of that and leave it to the practitioners who devote their lives to learning about it. So.
Thank you. Our other panelists, thoughts?
Yeah, so, I mean, I feel like there's so many people working on the ground doing foundational and transformational work, and I'm just up in the clouds all the time. But what I wanted to say is, you know, the 19th century was really about chemistry. The 20th century was really about physics. The 21st century is about biology. And the thing that I get really excited about is transitioning from an industrial era, chemical-based manufacturing paradigm to shifting to living systems that can help reduce the amount of land and water and pesticides and insecticides that we need to feed our growing population and move us away from other manufacturing processes like plastics and other non-renewable sources so that we can make clean food, produce fewer medicines that are more effective, and really transition to renewable cells and therapies, to renewable energies, and to a cleaner, more sustainable, and more balanced ecosystem. So that's my vision of, and my big hope of where we can go with all of this. You know, my fear is around language and ignorance. And the compounding lack of effective communications around all of this. You know, when you hear something like lab-grown meat, you know, your first reaction is, ooh, well, that's the meat industry that coined that phrase. You know, when you hear plant-based proteins, you go, oh, you know, but it's all kind of part and parcel of the same thing. When you go in the grocery store and you see a non-GMO project stamped food, bag of lettuce or whatever, you go, oh yeah, I want that. And then you think, wow, everything else in this grocery store must be genetically modified. I'm going to stick to the stuff that's clearly labeled non-genetically modified. Well, there is no genetically modified lettuce available in your grocery store right now. They are just alarming you with packaging that Whole Foods told them would sell better. You know, there are no trans fats in chocolate. There's no gluten in chocolate. I was a chocolate manufacturer. They said you ought to put that on your label. It was like, and confuse the consumer further. You know, the next thing that we're going to hear about is synthetic biology. You're going to go, oh, that's a really bad thing. I don't want synthetic biology. Yes, you do. Listen to me. Yes, you do. So don't be fooled by the headlines. Don't be fooled by the packaging. Take a time to understand how science, and especially living science, biological sciences, can improve our health, our food, and our environment. So that's what I'm afraid of. That's where the opportunity is. Thank you.
I'll do a quick one, since we're any topic. One, I really hope we put to bed this whole vaccines bullshit.
Yeah.
I think hopefully we will start elevating the dialogue in science in this country in the way that we need it. I hope we have more scientists in Congress.
Yes.
We have 1, 2, 3. It's incredible while other countries have half of their governing bodies have a degree. So I think we have a lot to do to be able to respect the science, the specialists, and then have the informed conversations that we need to have. So I'm actually looking forward to that. I'm going to stick with that.
Thank you very much. Hold on to your mics. So what I want to do is I want to open it up to Q&A. So questions from the audience? Yes.
Well, I got a whole bunch, but
You might need to keep your mic.
I saw it. Is it on?
You might
Yeah,
want to put
yes,
it right
it
against
is.
your, as close to
Well,
that. There you go. There.
I saw a magazine about 15 years ago, health magazine, and it makes sense, I just don't know if it's true, that if you had a cup of broccoli in 1947, and had a certain amount of nutrients in it. To get the same amount of nutrients today, you'd need 24 cups of broccoli. And they said then the topsoil was like 6 inches and now it's a half an inch. So it seems to me, you know, all this, there's a lot of sophistication, but this is not rocket science. But is that true? Are we losing our nutrients in the course of agriculture?
Anybody know that?
I mean, look, I'm kind of an amateur farmer. I doubt that any. Well, you know, the concept that a cup of broccoli in the 40s was 24 times more nutritious than today. I think it's a little bit of a leap there, but there may be one discrete nutrient, whether it's a mineral or whatnot, that may change over time. But the genetics that produces broccoli in the 40s till today probably hasn't changed all that much. But it's sensationalism, right? You know, what's that term people use? Fake news, right? I mean, it's, my father used to tell me in a very derogatory way that the fruit that he grew in his home country was far better than the fruit we grow here, right? I mean, listen, bottom line is that there are changes, qualitative changes and quantitative changes in everything we do today that differs from the past. But in general, nutrition today arguably is far better than it was 40, 50 years ago.
Okay, I really hate to contradict you, but
Okay,
I have.
please.
So let me say yes,
Yeah.
and, because I think everything you said is of course true. On the other hand, 50, 60 years ago, the broccoli that came out of the ground hit your plate much sooner than it does today. And so we do know that the nutritional content of our vegetables declines every day, right? So that's why you want to eat it as close to raw as you can.
Is that because in the 40s and 50s, the local farmer is who delivered food to the individual?
Right, it's
Supply
before
chain. So the average time for the apple that you have in your store is 12 months, from when it was cut to when it gets to your
Same with your eggs.
12 months.
Yeah. So that's one thing. A second thing is, and you did refer to this, the nutritional sources that went into making your broccoli. I can't speak to that directly, but I do know that the nutritional things that are being fed to farmed fish, for instance, have resulted in significantly less nutritional value in our fish today than in the past. So there are these forces at work. Ironically, they're the result of something called the Green Revolution, which sounds really great, but in fact, that was the beginning of the mass industrialization of our food systems and the use of hormones and distribution systems and all the rest of it. So we are still working very hard to undo the damage ultimately done by the Green Revolution.
But I'm biased because I get my broccoli from my own amateur garden.
Well, the supply chain's very short now. Okay, so, yes.
I have a question regarding the mesenchymal stem cells for the placenta. How do they differentiate with regard to bone marrow derived or fat derived mesenchymal stem cells? Can you elaborate on that?
So first of all, the term mesenchymal stem cell is derived from the original language created by a guy named Arnold Kaplan, who first discovered that stem cells from bone marrow could differentiate into the part of the mesodermal lineage, including muscle and certain other tissues. And that nomenclature stuck for a long time. It sticks today, but it's very flawed nomenclature. So first of all, stem cells should be called based upon where they come from, so their source, whether they're pluripotent, able to differentiate into all the lineage cell types, or multipotent, a limited number of cell types. And that's the clearest way to define that. That being said, your question is, how does placental pluripotent cells differentiate from bone marrow pluripotent or adipose-derived pluripotent? First and foremost, placental cells are far more abundant. There are 130 million placentas thrown away a year in the world. You have a lot of access to them, okay? One placenta can produce billions and billions of those cells, whereas from the bone marrow of an adult donor, unless you suck their bone marrow dry, you can get a much farther limited number of those cells. And same thing from adipose tissue. And the cells from the placenta are far younger, so they have qualitative advantages such as long telomere length. They have essentially zero induced abnormalities, acquired mutations, deletions, and so on. So in terms of quality, placental cells have a lot of advantages. That being said, you can be somewhat agnostic about the source of the cells if what you are interested in is one biologic attribute of those cells, such as their synthetic behavior.
We define pluripotency, the ability of cells to differentiate to all types of cells. So
Right.
we established that mesenchymal stem cells are actually multipotent and not pluripotent.
Correct.
So what about the placental stem cells? Are we talking pluripotency really, or are we talking about multipotency? And that was one question. The other question is, when we talk quality, usually we differentiate cells and their ability to differentiate into other lineages after certain passages. So do we have these passage restrictions also with the placental cells?
These are great questions. You must be a stem cell biologist.
I am.
So first and foremost, placental origin cells derive from either two methodologies, either direct perfusion of the postpartum organ or by explantation. Both of those sources derive cells that at first to sixth passage can be differentiated into all three tissue lineages. So in that vein, they meet the pluripotency requirement, okay, or the definition. At culture expansion, for example, the cells we've taken into the clinic to treat autoimmune disease, we actually use pluripotency as a release specification. So our cells, after 20 passages, so from one placental cell line, I can produce 100,000 doses of cells. At the terminal step of proliferation prior to use clinically, those cells meet in assays the pluripotency definition. They become ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm when stimulated with the appropriate factors and so on.
I
So-
think these will be wonderful conversations.
Right.
So I just want to make sure we get an opportunity for, I know we have a lot of hands up, and so I want to, I think this gentleman here, Shiv,
That was an
first
extraordinary
you,
education.
and you'll be next, Shiv.
Don't do that.
Hi guys, kind of a stimulating question. I'm not sure anybody will have a concise answer, but you're talking about preparing people for the revolution. You know, what's going to change? What's going to change rapidly? We're talking about synthetic biology. I'm sure many other things are going to happen simultaneously. The thought, or it feels like the problem we need to solve, or let us move forward most quickly if we do solve it, is how to keep people open-minded, how to keep humanity open-minded and not kind of latching on to its first understanding, which seems to be how biology of the brain is designed. It can be programmed at an early age and just understand that's how the world works and not reevaluate it unless you're under extreme pressure. That being our basis, it seems like that's a tough nut to crack, but it would allow so much, I guess, more rapid progress in all areas. So ideas or concerns around that?
Any thoughts from our panel?
Yeah, I'll kick off, I'll lean in on that one for a second. So another way of stating what you were just describing is that the pace of cultural change or the ability of human institutions to change and adapt is increasingly logarithmically declining by comparison to the pace of change in all of these systems. So we are, if we do not create new institutions that can adapt and change more rapidly, but still be governed, and not create Skynet, we are inevitably going to leave our population behind because our culture, our institutions cannot keep pace. It's very clear, they cannot keep pace. So this is one of many implications of the particular technology that I focus the most on around blockchain. One of the things that can happen in that environment is creating something that we'll probably have to rename several times before it's ever anything but half-baked, but we call them decentralized autonomous organizations. And there is in this concept, and it really lives mainly at a conceptual level at this time, but in this concept there is the possibility of computational trust, computational governance at global scale. And it is the best idea I think we have now of how we could create corresponding social and cultural institutions that has any hope of keeping pace with the kind of change we're working on. So great question.
Thank you very much. Don, did you want to say
Just a
something?
quick comment. I
Please.
think in any innovation, it requires us to lean into risk, and risk is inherent. We don't know where it's going to go. We see the opportunity, we see obviously the downside, and I think to lean into risk requires trust. And I think if companies would stop saying trust me, trust me, trust me, and rather sort of adopt a position of trustworthiness, it's my job to get your trust, not your job to trust me. And then really dig into why should I trust you? And I think we do have to get back to trust in the institution of science. Because if we don't believe it, there's not arbiters of truth in science, whether it's food or climate change or whatever, we won't get anybody past that. So we need to reestablish our arbiters of truth in science. And then it's in the mission, in the people executing the mission, et cetera. But I do worry that science has become a little, unfortunately, politicized.
Certainly in our country. Shiv, you had a question.
Yeah, so sometimes in our company we call the regulatory team the sales prevention team. They tell us what we can't do or say, and there are those young attorneys that want to make their name, and they could probably come after me and put me in jail for even pitching to investors, right? What is wholly truthful and non-misleading? Like, the standard is so high. You guys are all spearheading unique technologies that are beyond regulatory law today. Like, how do you guys think about, how far to push it? Because I always ask, where's the line? How close can I get up to it? Am I beyond it or am I on it? But I'd love to understand how you guys think about it, because you're way beyond that point now of where the FDA can guide you.
Who would like to take that? All at once. I see the mic being passed.
There's ways to stay. So we have taken actually there's places we can take risk, and there's places where we take a very conservative approach to follow everything. So we have all the acronyms you can imagine, a CLIA in our lab, and it's a CAP accredited, and HIPAA compliant, and this and this and this. And we do believe that there's lines you cannot cross. I think to the point that Jane was making is, how many of you want to, if I could right now edit you, I'm going to simplify this, and give you 20% better any sense that you want. You can see better 20%, or hear, or taste, or smell, touch. I can improve any sense that you choose by 20%. How many of you would want to do it?
What's the side effect?
Well, okay, so you ask that, and have a room, or I can tell you right now, all right, and then, well, maybe, I'm not sure. If you tell me that one of my daughters has a condition that requires her to edit her DNA, I don't care the side effects. If she's going to live, if this is a life-saving thing, I'll do it, right?
No, you won't, because you can't guarantee that if the side effect is death in a 5-year
course,
course.
Clearly, yes.
Right.
I'm sure we can find one case. Well, I won't. Understood. The point is that we make decisions and take risks we use very different frameworks for us, for family, for our children. They're very, very different, right? So the difficult questions are going to come. I think some of the pushing the boundaries of gene editing is not necessarily going to come from a bad actor, a terrorist, it's going to come from people that have the ability to do some type of treatment that helps someone, and then suddenly we've crossed the line, right?
Does anybody here think that the FDA is the sole determinant of whether a product is safe and efficacious? Okay, so you made a point. 75% of all approved cancer drugs don't work in the patients they're prescribed for. Okay, and a lot of those patients suffer horrific consequences of those therapies, and most die. Listen, I'm a surgeon. Okay, shit happens, right? Under the best trained provider, who has only the patient's best interest at heart, administering the approved and in some cases the unapproved therapies, you cannot guarantee outcome, and you have to rely upon some level of expertise and professionalism to be the steward of that therapy. And I think it's a disgrace that we have, as a nation, relied now on administrative decision makers who will determine what therapy should be provided or not, when they've never been in an operating room. They've never been in a clinic. So,
Thank you all. So do you want to say last words from our panelists, and then we're going to give people an opportunity to mingle and ask questions direct, one-on-one. So yes, please.
Just to the sales prevention team, brilliant. I just would like to assert that we need to have an attitude of partnership and openness with our regulators, and that in healthcare and life sciences particularly, many of these things need to evolve as public-private partnerships, and that it's critical that we are collaborative and not combative and oppositional in our attitude and positioning toward our public sector partners.
Any other?
who would rather have their therapy determined by an attorney or by a physician who's got 40 years experience?
Which hand do we put up for which? Okay, so I really want to thank our panelists for a lively discussion. Thank you for bringing all that great and also our wonderful guests tonight. We invite you to stick around. We're going to be around here, and then we're also going to be taking tours of the Innovation Lab. Please feel free to join us. So I know some of you will be here for a little while, and some will be heading off to those locations, so I want to be respectful of that. I think we've got one such person. So with that, thank you very, very much. Really enjoyed having you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I had to brief data, medical probably situations like a show. So, your company was going to create exactly modified humans with no side effects, and that can be perfectly predicted because you don't have to worry about it. We're working on it. I can't